you. Hi, everybody. I wasn't sure I was at the right talk. I'm supposed to be down the way at the DevOps track and decided to take a little bit of a detour and come in here. And, well, I'm sorry. You have the rest of the week to drink it off. And let me see, where's my little clicker guy? All right. So I figured, this is the horror story part of the show. So bear with me. Nice to meet everybody. This is a little bit about me. I'm a little wild. Intuit had me join around 4.5 years ago. When I got there, I worked for a 30-year-old software company who said they wanted to go all in on the cloud. And so that's how I got started at Intuit. I remember my first couple of days there. They were trying to take tax workloads into the public cloud. And there was a lot of discussions about how to do that. As you can imagine, the cloud platforms have come a long way since this time. It was around 2012. So along the way, I started the DevSecOps Foundation, have started the Hacker Girl Club, if you will, and got this all-day DevOps conference going with Mark Miller and some of the guys in the DevOps track down the way. What does that translate into for the CSA group here? How many people code? That's a good amount. I remember asking that question a while back, and it was pretty much no one. It's been, almost 5 years since I asked that question last. So it's really cool to see a lot more people coding in this audience, because we're all going to need to. Unicorns suck. Let's start there, right? You got to have your obligatory cat picture in a security talk. So this is my obligatory cat picture. I'm going to tell you about why we need to upgrade our cat picture because, by the way, the environment's getting way more hostile. And ultimately, like I said, unicorns suck. Software is eating the world. We've seen this from Mark Andreessen back in 2011. Really great journey. We've been on it for a while now, and there's been a lot that's changed. DevOps is eating the world as well. There's been almost a 1,500% increase in the last couple of years in the number of DevOps jobs that have arisen. When you look out there at DevOps jobs, if you type it into Indeed, you see a couple, 10,000, maybe 12,000 jobs around this that are open, that haven't been filled. They're hard to fill. They're starting to pop up. Cloud is eating the world. 76,000 jobs that are out there ready to be fulfilled. Oh, by the way, there's around almost 500,000 jobs in software that are out there that are ready to be filled. And that kind of tells you that we're all on this journey together. What's that translate into when security is blocking the world? Where do you think that our profession is going if we're considered the blockers for this world? I can tell you where I think that I got told I was going back when Josh Corman said this statement on stage. I started having the mental image of dinosaurs. And basically, that picture there with the rainbow poop, that's the unicorns that I think suck. And the reason why is because they believe that their job is to do all these magical things, and then when they poop out bad stuff, it's for us to clean up. I'll tell you that one of my discussions at LastCon was all about how they could eat better things so that they could have their own biodegradable poop, if you will. And so I'm tired of cleaning up after folks. I think it's better for us to shift left. That means that folks like you are going to help us with this journey. If you didn't know you were on this ride, well, welcome. We need you. What's that mean? What does it translate into? Well, if we're not going to go extinct, we better change, right? That means we've got to do some culture hacking. It means we've got to ultimately come up with something new. By the way, it may not seem all that new, but making security everyone's responsibility is relatively new in their minds, maybe not ours. They don't speak like us. They don't think like us. And from a DevOps perspective, by the way, we are them too. If you're coding, you're a DevOps. If you're a security professional, your job is to make it so security gets all the way up to the left. People making bad decisions happens at the very ideation of software. So DevSecOps is the next thing. When we started working on this at Intuit, it really became a next generation for us. How are we going to make it so that everyone in our company, 8,500 people, spoke security? And we're well on that journey. I would say that there have definitely been ups and downs, peaks and valleys, but ultimately everybody does have the vernacular of security as everyone's responsibility. It translates into a lot of hard things to do. Why is it necessary? Well, we could all stay stagnant, think that security is perfect, or we could do a Wardley map and realize that the world is changing. The cloud is coming. It's basically changing a lot of things along with us. You can move software at the speed of light if everybody can be part of that journey. DevOps starts to become a really interesting thing when security is part of that conversation. But ultimately, how do we make it part of that conversation when we all know that it's a really complex field, that we've come to know and love all of these vulnerabilities and defects, and they are at the minutia level of the journey? Well, we know that it's going to take a lot of effort. So what is DevSecOps? A lot of people have asked for a definition. What I will tell you is there's a lot of is and there's a lot of is not. DevSecOps is a variety of things. It's a community-driven effort. There isn't anybody necessarily capitalizing on this. I go around and volunteer my time to help people understand this. My company is great about helping to bring a community together. I love the fact that we get to experiment with others like yourselves and ultimately build up the knowledge base and the capabilities that many people can go through to understand what it takes to have this holistic mindset for DevOps plus security. And why is that necessary for a cloud group? Well, how many people operate their security on the cloud? Pretty cool. Okay, a few. My group went all in on moving security into the cloud. That means we run our SIM. It means we run all of our stuff, if you will. We've built everything that we have from a security capabilities perspective on the cloud. And we did that primarily so that security people could learn what it meant to do this work. Ultimately, how to write the code, how to be able to push it out, how to do continuous delivery, how to speak CI/CD, and we did that to build skills. So how do we operate this? It kind of was interesting because some of the ways in which you can operate DevSecOps kind of have traditional roots, but they have a little bit of a twist to it. So a lot of you may see some of these things and go, okay, well, that looks kind of like what we do, with a little bit of a bent. So if you can imagine being able to take your vulnerability program and predict out what security flaws you will have, it's a really interesting thing to go, you know what, we've got billions of events, and that sifts all the way down to a very few that we have to fix right now. That's the change. The change really comes from taking security and moving it from a gating approval process, a checklist, and moving it all the way up so that everybody understands what it means to build into their workloads so that everybody can operate on those workloads along the process. Continuous security is part of that vision. And from a development standpoint, it means that as software is going from one end to another, it's being deployed continuously. You need to be able to respond to the things that come out of it. You need that information to go back to your developers, and your developers need to be able to fix their mistakes in real time. So how hard could it be, right? Anyone who knows the cloud, who's been doing software publishes, who's been working DevOps style, knows this pipeline pretty well. It's nice and seamless. There's a bunch of products out there. I picked a few that we use. There's a bunch in this category. But how hard could it be for a security professional? Well, it kind of looks like this right now. That's a lot of stuff for a security team to know. There's 1 million people right now that could have jobs in security and not 1 million people to fill them. And in addition, all the complexity that's getting added here. It means that every person that's sitting in this chair needs to know all these products and pretty well. Otherwise, we need to find a way to make it so that the DevOps teams out there understand these products pretty well. And that's a training initiative for your company. So if you can imagine, it also means that the space down here at the very bottom has to start to coalesce and converge, and we're going to see change from that as well. We're going to see cloud providers add some of these features and capabilities to their platforms. And ultimately, it's going to transform not only how DevOps works, but how we work. So what types of skills are required? We went through this exercise of trying to bring people together. We set up something called the CAT team, which I run. It was originally 10 people, and what we decided to do was we decided to hire in a bunch of developers, security professionals, and operations, sit them at a very large table and have them argue with each other. It was very entertaining, I would say, at first, but it was also a big lesson, right? And what we learned was, well, as you can imagine, developers didn't have a lot of security skills or operational skills. Operations didn't have a lot of development skills or security skills, and security engineers didn't have dev or ops. And so you can imagine when you put everybody at the table and they've been advancing their skills together, you got the best of all worlds. So it became a sort of magical place to work at that table, and we've since expanded the table to many more tables. And the reason why is because we realize that this is something that's very necessary, especially as you're pushing workloads very quickly, and you have to get to the point where you can no longer afford approvals because, by the way, it's at the push of a button that software gets delivered. So has everyone bought in? Anybody in here, manager, leader? Okay, a few that'll admit it. All right. I would say that it's an interesting thing to go through the process of having managers and DevOps and everybody having this conversation frequently. And the reason why is because at the very top of your organization, they have these things called financial goals, financial commitments, and financial reporting. And at the very bottom of your company, you have a whole bunch of people who want to learn skills and be able to deliver something awesome and new and exciting, and they want to please your customers. Meshing the two has always been an interesting challenge. If you can imagine, you're not going to be able to change the financial reporting process so that it doesn't happen on a quarterly basis. You're going to have to find a way to mesh both worlds. You don't want to necessarily take away the innovation or the creativity of the people that are working on your software every day. And so in the middle, you actually have to build glue, and we've called this Agile and Scrum, and what I'll tell you is managers don't speak Agile and Scrum, they speak deliverables, commitments, and deadlines. And so bringing those two together has been very interesting. We've done it through Jira ourselves, but there's probably a bunch of software that hasn't been created. So what were the initial challenges? Well, initially, if you look at your process, we've talked a little bit about supply chain. Software supply chain is very interesting, especially when you're migrating to a cloud environment. So this isn't just necessarily an environment where you stand up a stack like you did in your data center and everything gets built in. Instead, it's actually everything gets built in as part of what the software is that's getting created. And so along the way, you have to have changes to your design, build, deploy, and operate phases such that mistakes are caught along the way and remediated very quickly. I would tell you that this is a really interesting journey for most companies. The reason why is because decisions are the basis for everything in a cloudy environment, like we all know. And formulating those decisions so you understand the pros and cons, one-way gates versus two-way gates. Can you come back from a bad decision? How hard is it? How much investment is it going to take? When you think about sitting, 7 or 8 people in a room and dedicating their time for a year to something, you're talking about millions of dollars. And so if you have a one-way gate, it means you're going through that gate, and to go backwards to be able to pull that decision back is very difficult. So we've gone through this process, and these were some of the initial challenges that we faced. I would say that there are many more to be had, and as we're all learning this journey, I would say it's not too late for anybody to get started and start sharing what they've learned. Is there a playbook? Yeah. I put up a word wall on purpose so you could see that there's a whole bunch that can be done, will need to be done, an operating model, a set of processes, tooling, skill sets, capabilities. You need to think about the metrics. If you're not keeping score, you need to be. How you keep score is important. How your team keeps score is important. And by the way, as leaders and managers, keeping score at the very top doesn't necessarily make a cloudy environment. So you've got to change and transform how you think about it. I tend to let our engineers decide how they're going to keep score and tell them whether or not I think it's a valuable score. That tends to be an interesting thing, and it ends up creating playbooks like this without anybody at the very top having to necessarily dictate it. Figuring out how to harness that energy from the very bottom of your organization, closest to making the decisions in real time with your software, is essential. And it's one of the biggest changes that we'll all have to make. So creating a checklist, those guardrails and guidelines that we're all in love with, it's not necessarily the best thing. So can you give me an example of the difference? Yeah, the example of a difference is that we've taken most of our energy of a compliance team and we've migrated them to the left. And we've migrated them upstream to what we call the red team. I run the red team at Intuit. The red team is right now 35 people who all speak red. Basically, they are bringing in threat intel. They're looking at vulnerabilities. They're constantly assessing what's bad in a stack. They're taking that information, pushing it back out to developers so that they can remediate the mistakes that they make. as close to real time as possible. And that helps to be able to make it so that they don't necessarily have to spend all this money trying to figure those things out when they're the most costly. The other thing that changes is you need to have a group of people who are watching your adversaries. And that is not necessarily something that gets done in whole from a vendor. It's something that your company has to get really good at. The notion of deception and illusion is going to come into play more, and we're seeing more of that become part of this journey. How are you going to use deceptive techniques to be able to manage your workloads and change how things get done so that you can learn from the environment and make the best decisions for your software? I think this is probably the easiest way to describe the major change. You're bringing in a whole bunch of information. You're correlating that information. You've got case management, old GRC, a little bit of SOC, and then sprinkle in some cloud fairy dust, and all of a sudden you've got case management that brings information in, and it figures out, and you figure out how to deal with your mistakes in real time. It gets published directly into a developer backlog. How many people do that today? You publish directly into developer backlog and they work on those items. Good, things are changing. And by the way, that's the change that's necessary. If you aren't there yet, that's where you're headed. And by the way, it's a hard discussion. It's one of the most important discussions that you'll have, and if you want to know where the war is, it's right here. So you've got to figure out how to take what you know as a security professional and help people to understand when they've made mistakes. And I can tell you that hygiene is not it. If you're taking all this stuff out of your scanners and you're basically pushing that over to your developers and thinking that they're going to take in millions of things to do and prioritize it correctly, they're not. There's a whole bunch of investment needs to be made here. There's another way to do this, maybe to simplify it, give somebody some guardrails that's a little bit easier. Yeah, the way we did that was we basically came up with 5 things, because basically most people can only remember 5 things well. They say it's 8. I'll tell you it's 5. It might even be 3, but if they get the bottom 3 right, majority of the rest of your time is going to be spent with less fights. The most important thing that you can do with a cloud workload is get your zoning and containment right. By the way, that seems to be where most of the big mistakes get made. And asset management. When you don't know something's out in the cloud and you can't actually figure out how to test it or provide the mistakes back to your company, it doesn't become something that becomes apparent or transparent to your organization. And so measuring just those 2 things can be really important. And then putting logging in so that it can be real time is essential and critical. I said we were going to upgrade our cats. My cat team is called the Cyber Attack Tiger Team. And the reason why is because we upgraded our cats. We realized that we had to dedicate time to making specialty skills become more apparent in our organization. We hack everything, anything that moves, and we are constantly trying to get ahead of attackers. I'll tell you, if you're not doing this, you need to be. Finally, everyone here is part of this mission. It once was that we didn't share information as rapidly as we are today. Security is transforming in a mega way. When it comes down to it, the best thing we can do is share. The adversaries share constantly. They sell tools to each other. But for whatever reason, from one organization to another, we put up a wall like it's going to be a competitive differentiator. Security is not a competitive differentiator. We must get united, and we must figure out how to make security come together and share what we know against adversaries. Because, by the way, when we share what we know about adversaries, we actually take away all the low-hanging fruit. We make it much more costly for them to do the bad things that they do on a daily basis. Finally, I'll tell you, you need to get involved. You need to figure out how to write down what you know, write articles, get people to contribute, share and bring experiments to bear. And if there's one thing that I can solicit to this group, it's that CSA truly does need to get DevSecOps mindset and capabilities built in. I went to CSA's website a long while back, and I love it. But I also wish there was so much more there. We've got to automate. We've got to figure out how to build things in, and we've got to actually use our numbers to our advantages. So I leave you with this last statement. Please get involved. Thank you so much.